The coffee cup trembled against the white porcelain saucer as Maria Santos steadied her hands, watching the steam curl upward like ghostly fingers in the morning light filtering through Romano's Italian bistro. 23 years of carrying trays had taught her to read the subtle tremors in her own grip. Today felt different, charged with an electricity that made her chest tight and her breathing shallow. The familiar weight of the sterling silver locket against her collarbone seemed heavier somehow, its engraved surface catching the amber glow from the vintage Edison bulbs that hung throughout the restaurant like suspended memories. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Table 12 needs their usual, called Tommy Martinez from behind the espresso machine, his weathered face creased with the kind of smile that had welcomed regulars for over a decade. Tommy understood the rhythm of Romano's better than anyone, the way Mrs. Chen always ordered her cappuccino extra hot at precisely 8:15, how the construction workers from the site across 5th Street like their eggs over easy with a side of good-natured ribbing about last night's game. But even Tommy seemed to sense something different in the air today, glancing repeatedly toward the large corner booth where shadows fell in strange patterns across the burgundy leather. Maria had felt it the moment she'd walked through the heavy glass doors that morning, the sensation of standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. The restaurant hummed with its usual energy, the gentle clatter of silverware against ceramic, the soft murmur of morning conversations, the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine that had become the heartbeat of her world. Yet underneath it all there was a tension, like the moment before lightning strikes, when every hair on your arm stands at attention. The corner booth had been reserved for weeks, Tommy had mentioned casually while counting the previous night's receipts. A private party, he'd said, someone important enough to book out the entire back section on a Tuesday morning when Romano's typically enjoyed its quietest hours. Maria had nodded absently, more focused on the stack of bills waiting at home and the worn sole of her left shoe that would need replacing soon. Money had always been tight since Daniel's accident 3 years ago, when a drunk driver had transformed her husband from the family's primary breadwinner into someone who needed help remembering what day it was. But Tuesday mornings were sacred to Maria. They represented hope in small, manageable portions. The elderly gentleman who always left her a $5 tip despite ordering only black coffee and dry toast. The young mother who brought her twin boys and let Maria sneak them extra whipped cream on their hot chocolate. These moments had carried her through the darkest periods, when Daniel's medical bills threatened to drown them and the nights stretched endless with worry about their daughter Sofia's college tuition. The locket at her throat held Sofia's baby picture, taken 24 years ago in the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital. Even now, Maria could remember the weight of her newborn daughter in her arms, the way Sofia's tiny fingers had curled around her thumb with surprising strength. The photograph was faded now, the edges soft with handling, but Sofia's face remained clear, that perfect blend of wonder and determination that had defined her from her very first breath. A sudden crash from the kitchen made Maria jump, her hand instinctively flying to her throat where the locket rested. Carlos, the line cook, emerged with an apologetic shrug, sweeping ceramic shards into a dustpan while muttering in rapid Spanish. The moment passed, but the feeling remained, that sense of standing on the precipice of something that would change everything. Tommy approached her station behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron with deliberate movements. His dark eyes held the kind of concern that came from watching someone struggle for years, the gentle worry of a man who had become more family than employer. "You feeling all right today, Maria? You seem a little different," he finished for him, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know. I can't explain it. It's like waiting for news you're not sure you want to hear." The bell above the front door chimed, and Maria felt her breath catch. The morning light seemed to shift and dance as 3 figures entered the restaurant, their presence immediately commanding attention despite their apparent attempt at discretion. The man in the center moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to deference, His tailored charcoal suit spoke of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and even from across the room, Maria could see the weight he carried in his shoulders. Not physical, but emotional. The burden of someone who had lost something precious and spent years learning to live with the absence. Behind him walked a woman with silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon, her designer handbag clutched with white-knuckled intensity. Her eyes, even at a distance, held the hollow look of a mother who had never stopped searching. The third figure was younger, perhaps 30, with the lean build of someone who ran not for pleasure, but to outpace demons that followed too closely. Tommy straightened beside her, his casual demeanor shifting to professional alertness. "That's them," he murmured, though Maria had already known. The very air seemed to vibrate with their presence, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The man's gaze swept the restaurant with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to evaluating environments quickly. When his eyes landed on Maria, something flickered across his features. Recognition, perhaps, though she was certain they had never met. The moment stretched like taffy, sweet and strange, until the woman beside him placed a gentle hand on his arm, guiding him toward the reserved corner booth. As they settled into the burgundy leather seats, Maria found herself studying their faces with an intensity that surprised her. The woman's profile was aristocratic, her posture speaking of finishing schools and charity galas, yet there was a brokenness in the way she held herself, as if she were made of fine china that had been cracked and carefully glued back together. The younger man, their son perhaps, kept glancing toward the windows as if planning escape routes, his jaw tight with the kind of tension that comes from carrying family secrets. But it was the older man who drew Maria's attention like a magnet. There was something about the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the table in a pattern she almost recognized, that made her heart race with inexplicable anxiety. His profile was sharp and distinguished, the kind of face that graced business magazines and charity event programs, yet there was a vulnerability in his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. Tommy touched her elbow gently. "They asked specifically for our best server," he said quietly. "I told them you'd take care of them." Maria nodded, straightening her black apron and checking that her name tag was properly pinned to her burgundy uniform shirt. The fabric was worn thin in places, softened by countless washings and years of faithful service, but it was clean and pressed with the same care she brought to everything in her life. Her reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee machine showed a woman in her mid-40s with laugh lines around her brown eyes and silver threads beginning to weave through her dark hair. She looked exactly like what she was, a hard-working mother and wife who had learned to find dignity in service and strength in small kindnesses. The walk across the restaurant felt like moving through water, each step deliberate and strange. The familiar sounds of Romano's faded to a background hum as Maria approached the corner booth, her serving pad and pen ready, her professional smile in place. But as she drew closer, something extraordinary happened. The man looked up, and their eyes met with an impact that seemed to stop time itself. His face went pale, the color draining so quickly that Maria instinctively stepped forward, concerned he might be having some kind of medical episode. His companions noticed immediately, the woman reaching for his hand, while the younger man half rose from his seat, alarm clear in his features. "Sir," Maria found her voice, though it sounded distant and strange to her own ears. "Are you all right? Can I get you some water?" The man's lips moved soundlessly for a moment, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, thick with an emotion Maria couldn't identify. Your face. You have her face." The woman beside him made a sound that was half gasp, half sob, her perfectly manicured hand flying to cover her mouth. The younger man's complexion had gone ash-gray, his eyes darting between Maria and his father with growing understanding. "I'm sorry?" Maria's professional training kicked in, her voice gentle but puzzled. "I think there might be some confusion. Would you like me to give you a few more minutes to look at the menu?" But the man was shaking his head, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The scar, he whispered, his eyes fixed at a point just above Maria's left eyebrow where a thin white line cut through her skin like a crescent moon. It was barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it, a remnant from a childhood accident that had long since faded to near invisibility. 24 years, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, though tears had begun to gather in his eyes. 24 years I've been looking for you. The words hit Maria like physical blows, stealing her breath and making her legs suddenly unsteady. The serving pad slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over their corner of the restaurant. Maria's world tilted on its axis as she stared into the stranger's eyes, searching for some explanation that would make sense of words that seemed to have no meaning. 24 years. The exact number of years since Sofia had been born. The coincidence struck her like ice water, flooding her system with adrenaline that made her hands shake and her vision blur at the edges. "I'm sorry," she managed, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The professional smile she had perfected over decades of service felt plastic and wrong on her face. "My name is Maria Santos. I've worked here at Romano's for 6 years.
The woman in the elegant suit had gone completely white, her designer handbag sliding forgotten to the floor as she gripped the edge of the table with both hands. "Robert," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle din of the restaurant. "Robert, look at her hands." Without conscious thought, Maria glanced down at her own hands. Capable hands, she'd always thought, with short nails kept scrupulously cleaned and calluses earned through honest work. Her wedding ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother, caught the morning light. But it was the birthmark on the back of her right hand that made her breath catch, a small, coffee-colored mark shaped like a butterfly's wing that she'd inherited from her mother. The man named Robert was staring at that same mark with an expression of wonder and anguish that made Maria's chest tighten with inexplicable sympathy. "Elena," he breathed to the woman beside him. "It's exactly like Elena's. Exactly the same shape, the same position." "Who is Elena?" Maria found herself asking, though part of her was terrified of the answer. The rational part of her mind, the part that paid bills and scheduled Daniel's doctor appointments and worried about Sofia's student loans, insisted this was all an elaborate mistake, perhaps even some cruel joke. But her heart was beating with the irregular rhythm of recognition, as if her body knew truths her mind couldn't yet accept. The younger man, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "Elena was our daughter," he said quietly, his voice carrying the careful control of someone who had learned to navigate family trauma. "She disappeared 24 years ago. She was 3 months old." The words landed in Maria's consciousness like stones dropped in still water, creating ripples that spread outward until her entire sense of reality began to shift. 3 months old, 24 years ago. A baby who had disappeared, leaving behind parents who had never stopped searching. Maria's hand moved involuntarily to the locket at her throat, her fingers closing around the warm metal with desperate intensity. Inside was Sofia's baby picture, taken at St. Mary's Hospital the day she was born, or the day Maria thought she was born. Suddenly, the certainties that had anchored her life for over 2 decades felt as insubstantial as morning mist. "I need to sit down," she whispered, her legs threatening to give way entirely. Robert was on his feet immediately, his hand gentle but firm on her elbow as he guided her into the booth beside his wife. The gesture was so naturally protective that it sent another shock through Maria's system, the touch of a man who might be her father. Elena, the woman who might be her mother, was studying Maria's face with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable if not for the tears streaming down her cheeks. "The dimple in your chin," she said softly, reaching out as if to touch Maria's face before catching herself.
I used to kiss that dimple every night before putting you to bed. You were such a happy baby. You would laugh at everything. The ceiling fan, the sound of running water, even the vacuum cleaner. Mrs. Santos? Tommy's concerned voice cut through the surreal bubble that had formed around their table. Is everything all right over here? Do you need me to call someone? Maria looked up at her boss, her friend, with eyes that felt too wide and too bright. How could she explain what was happening when she didn't understand it herself? I'm fine, Tommy. Just give us a few minutes, please. Tommy's weathered face was creased with worry, but he nodded and retreated, though Maria could feel him watching from behind the counter. The other patrons of Romano's continued their morning routines, oblivious to the fact that a woman's entire identity was crumbling and reforming at table 12. My daughter, Sofia, the daughter I raised, she's 24 years old. She's in her final year at State University studying to be a pediatric nurse. She wants to help children, just like she's always wanted to help everyone she meets. Robert's face crumpled with an expression of joy so profound it was almost painful to witness. A nurse, he repeated wonderfully. Elena, our Elena, she used to line up all her dolls and pretend to take care of them when they were sick. She had this little toy stethoscope that she carried everywhere. The memory hit Maria like a physical blow, because Sofia had done the exact same thing as a child. She'd had a play medical kit that she'd received for her 5th birthday, and she'd spent hours treating her stuffed animals and anyone patient enough to submit to her ministrations. Maria had always assumed it was just typical childhood play, but now— "How did you lose her?" Maria asked, though the question felt like swallowing glass. How does a baby just disappear? Elena's composure finally cracked entirely, her carefully applied makeup streaking as tears flowed freely. "It was at the farmer's market," she said, her voice broken and raw. "The Saturday morning farmer's market downtown. You were in your stroller, and I had turned away for just a moment to pay for some flowers. When I turned back, you were gone. The stroller was there, but you were gone." Robert's hand found his wife's, their fingers intertwining with the desperate grip of people who had held on to each other through the worst imaginable loss. "We called the police immediately," he continued when Elena couldn't. "They searched everywhere. We hired private investigators. We put up posters on every street corner in the city. We never stopped looking."
The younger man, Maria realized she still didn't know his name, leaned forward with eyes that held the particular pain of a sibling who had grown up in the shadow of a missing sister. "I'm Marcus," he said simply. "I was born 2 years after Elena disappeared. My whole life I've been looking for my sister. Looking for you." Maria's world was fracturing and rebuilding itself with each word. The life she had known, the narrative of her existence that had seemed so solid and unchangeable, was revealing itself to be built on foundations of sand. She thought of the parents who had raised her, Antonio and Carmen Delgado, who had died in a car accident when she was 21. They had always been vague about her early years, she realized now with stunning clarity. When she'd asked about baby pictures, they'd claimed they'd been lost in a fire. When she'd wondered about relatives, they'd said the family was small, scattered. "The couple who raised me," Maria said slowly, her mind working through implications that seemed too enormous to grasp. "Antonio and Carmen Delgado, they told me they adopted me through a private agency when I was a baby. They said my birth parents couldn't take care of me." Robert's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "No agency," he said firmly. "We never gave up our rights. We never stopped fighting to bring you home. If someone took you and gave you to another family, it wasn't legal. It wasn't right." The bell above Romano's front door chimed again, and Maria looked up to see Sofia entering the restaurant,
her university backpack slung over one shoulder, and her long, dark hair caught in a messy bun that somehow managed to look both careless and beautiful. She was supposed to meet Maria for lunch between classes, a tradition they'd maintained since Sofia started college. But now, seeing her daughter, the girl she had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, Maria felt the foundation of everything she knew shifting beneath her feet. Sofia spotted them immediately, her bright smile fading to confusion as she took in the tableau at the corner booth. "Mom?" she called, concern creeping into her voice as she approached. "Is everything okay? You look like she's seen a ghost," Elena whispered, her eyes fixed on Sofia with an expression of wonder that bordered on awe. "Robert, she looks just like Elena did at that age. The same eyes, the same way of carrying herself." Sofia arrived at their table, her gaze moving uncertainly between Maria and the three strangers. "Mom, what's going on? Who are these people?" Maria opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. How do you tell the child you've raised that everything she's believed about her identity might be wrong? How do you explain that the grandparents she'd mourned might not have been her grandparents at all, and that her real family might be sitting right there, staring at her with 24 years of accumulated love and loss written across their faces? "Honey," Maria managed finally, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears, "these people they believe that I might be their daughter who went missing 24 years ago." Sofia blinked several times, processing information that seemed to make no sense in the context of their ordinary Tuesday routine. "That's crazy, Mom. You're Maria Santos. You were born in Phoenix. Your parents died when I was little, but you have their pictures in your jewelry box." The certainty in Sofia's voice was like a lifeline, and Maria grasped it desperately. Yes, she had pictures, documentation, a birth certificate with her name and the names of the people who had raised her. Surely that would resolve this confusion, this impossible coincidence that had shattered her morning and left her feeling unmoored from everything she thought she knew about herself. But even as she clung to these concrete proofs of her identity, doubt crept in like water through a crack. The scar above her eyebrow that had perfectly matched this stranger's description. The birthmark that had made a grown man weep with recognition. The way Sofia's face seemed to echo features she now saw reflected in Elena's aristocratic bone structure and Robert's determined jawline. "Could we—" Robert's voice was tentative, hopeful in a way that spoke of years of false leads and disappointments. "Could we perhaps get a DNA test, just to be certain? I know this is overwhelming, and I'm sure you have every reason to doubt us, but—" "No," Sofia said firmly, moving protectively closer to Maria. "I don't know what kind of scam this is, but my mother is not your missing daughter. She's Maria Santos, and she's been taking care of our family for my entire life. We don't need some strangers coming in here with their theories and their—" Maria's voice cut through her daughter's protective anger with gentle authority. Looking at the girls she had raised, she saw herself at that age, fierce, loyal, ready to fight the world to protect the people she loved. But she also saw something else now, something she had never noticed before. The elegant line of Sofia's nose that perfectly matched Elena's aristocratic bone structure, and the way her eyes tilted slightly upward at the corners, just like Marcus's did. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable, the kind of family traits that might go unnoticed unless you were looking for them. And now that Maria was looking, really looking, the similarities were everywhere, written in the architecture of faces and the gestures that seemed to echo across generations. "Maybe," Maria said quietly, her hand finding Sofia's and squeezing gently, Maybe we should find out for sure. The words hung in the air like a prayer or a curse, changing everything simply by being spoken aloud. Around them, Romano's continued its peaceful rhythm, but their corner booth had become the center of a storm that had been building for 24 years, finally ready to break. The silence that followed Maria's words was broken by the sharp scrape of Sofia's chair as she stepped backward, her face cycling through disbelief, hurt, and something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. "Nom, you can't be serious. These people are complete strangers. They walk in here with some story about a missing baby, and suddenly you're ready to question everything about who we are?" Elena reached towards Sofia with trembling fingers, her maternal instincts transcending the bizarre circumstances of their meeting. "Please don't be angry with her," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades spent mourning a lost child. "I know how this must look, how impossible it must seem. But when you've spent every day for 24 years wondering if your child is safe, if she's happy, if she's loved, when you finally find her, you'll do anything to know for certain." Sofia's eyes flashed with protective fire. "She is loved," she said fiercely. "My mother has worked herself to exhaustion taking care of our family. She sacrificed everything, her own dreams, her own comfort, to make sure my dad and I had what we needed. You don't get to come in here and act like you have some claim on her just because you lost a baby decades ago." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture that Maria recognized with startling clarity. She made the same movement when she was overwhelmed, her fingers finding the small hollow at the base of her neck, as if anchoring herself to something solid. The realization sent another wave of disorientation through Maria's already fractured sense of reality. Robert stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate in the way of a man accustomed to defusing tense situations. "You're absolutely right," he said to Sofia, his voice carrying genuine respect. "Your mother, Maria, has clearly done an extraordinary job raising you. The love between you is obvious, and it's beautiful. We would never want to diminish that or cause pain to either of you." "Then why are you here?" Sofia demanded, though her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. "Why bring up something that happened so long ago? Why now?" Marcus spoke for the first time since introducing himself, his quiet voice carrying an intensity that made everyone at the table lean forward slightly. "Because 3 weeks ago, our private investigator called with a lead, someone who remembered seeing a couple at the farmer's market that day, a couple who left in a hurry with a baby stroller, someone who had kept quiet for 24 years, but finally decided to come forward." The words sent a chill through the restaurant's warm atmosphere. Maria found herself thinking of Antonio and Carmen Delgado, the people who had raised her with what she had always believed was love and devotion. They had been in their 40s when they took her in, she remembered now, older than most new parents. Carmen had always seemed slightly nervous around authority figures, though Maria had attributed that to her shy nature and limited English. "The investigator traced them to Phoenix," Marcus continued, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. "The couple who took you. They had new identities, a fabricated history. They lived quietly, kept to themselves, and they raised a little girl named Elena as their own daughter, calling her Maria." Sofia sank into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her, the color draining from her face as the implications of Marcus's words began to settle. You're saying my grandparents were kidnappers?" The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud, contaminating every memory Maria had of her childhood. She thought of Carmen's gentle hands braiding her hair for school, of Antonio's patient voice helping her with homework at their small kitchen table. They had been loving parents by every measure she could remember, yet if what these strangers claimed was true, their love had been built on a foundation of unthinkable crime. "People do desperate things," Elena said quietly, her tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the devastating realization unfold across Sofia's young face. When they want something badly enough, when they convince themselves they can provide a better life, they justify actions that are unforgivable. Tommy approached their table again, his weathered face creased with concern. "Maria, I hate to interrupt, but you've got other tables asking for you. Mrs. Patterson's been waiting for her coffee refill for 10 minutes, and the Kowalski twins are getting cranky without their usual chocolate milk." The mention of her regular customers, people who depended on her small kindnesses and reliable service, grounded Maria momentarily in the familiar rhythm of her work life. These were the relationships that had defined her for years, the network of care and responsibility that gave her days structure and meaning. "I need to work," she said abruptly, standing on unsteady legs. I have responsibilities, people counting on me."
Robert stood as well, pulling a business card from his wallet with practiced ease. "Of course, we understand, but Maria—" He paused, seeming to test the name on his tongue. "Would you consider taking the DNA test? We could arrange for everything to be handled discreetly. No pressure, no publicity. Just answers." Maria stared at the elegant business card, thick cream paper with raised lettering that read Ashworth Industries, and beneath it, Robert's full name, Robert James Ashworth. The name was familiar in the way that extremely wealthy people's names often were, floating at the edges of public consciousness through charity events and business news. Sofia was staring at the card as well, her eyes widening as recognition dawned. "Ashworth Industries," Sofia whispered. "Mom, they own half the commercial real estate in the city, the children's hospital wing, the scholarship funded my university. They're worth hundreds of millions of dollars." The revelation added another layer of surreal impossibility to an already impossible situation. Maria Santos, waitress at Romano's Italian Bistro, could not possibly be the missing daughter of one of the region's wealthiest families. The very idea was absurd, the kind of plot twist that belonged in daytime soap operas rather than real life. Yet, as she looked around the table at these three people who claimed her as their own, Maria could not deny the physical evidence that seemed to accumulate with each passing moment. Elena's nervous hand gesture that mirrored her own, Marcus's smile that transformed his serious ace into something warmly familiar, Robert's protective instincts that had activated the moment he saw her distress. "The test," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. "How long would it take to get results?" 48 hours, Robert replied immediately, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle flame in darkness. "We could have the samples taken this afternoon and rush through processing. By Thursday morning, we would know for certain." Sofia reached across the table and grasped Maria's hand with desperate intensity. "Mom, please think about what you're doing. Even if the test proves what they think it proves, what then? What happens to us, to Dad, to our family?" The question struck at the heart of Maria's deepest fear. Daniel was finally showing signs of improvement from his accident-related brain injury, but remained fragile, dependent on routine and familiar faces for stability. Their modest apartment in the Riverside district was home, filled with 24 years of accumulated memories and carefully chosen possessions. Sofia was so close to graduation, to achieving the dream of becoming a pediatric nurse that they had all worked toward together. "Nothing has to change," Elena said urgently, seeming to read the panic in Maria's expression. "We're not trying to take you away from the life you've built. We just want to know. We want to be part of your life if you'll let us. We want to know our granddaughter." The word granddaughter made Sofia flinch visibly, her grip on Maria's hand tightening until it was almost painful. "I already have grandparents. They died when I was little, but they were good people. They loved us. They took care of us when no one else would." "They stole you," Marcus said quietly, his words cutting through Sofia's defensive narrative with surgical precision. "Whatever their motivations, whatever love they showed you afterward, they took you from parents who were desperate to find you. They robbed you of 24 years with your real family." Sofia stood so quickly that her chair toppled backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made every head in the restaurant turn toward their table.
They are my real family, she said, her voice rising to near shouting levels. These people, she gestured wildly at Robert, Elena, and Marcus, are strangers, rich strangers who think they can buy their way into our lives with their theories and their DNA tests and their... Sofia, please, Maria interrupted, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her careful control. Sit down. People are staring. But Sofia was beyond caring about social niceties or public scenes. Years of suppressed anxiety about their family's financial struggles, about their father's condition, about her mother's sacrifices seemed to be pouring out in a torrent of protective rage. No, I won't sit down. I won't pretend this is normal or okay. These people show up out of nowhere, and suddenly everything about our lives is supposed to be a lie? Everything Mom and Dad taught me about our family history, about who we are, it's all supposed to be fake because some rich family lost a baby once upon a time?
Tommy was approaching again, this time with the determined stride of a man prepared to handle a disturbance. Other patrons were openly staring now, some with expressions of concern, others with the avid curiosity of people witnessing someone else's private drama unfold in public. "Sofia, honey," Elena said, rising from her seat with graceful urgency. "Please don't blame your mother for wanting to know the truth. Don't blame her for needing answers to questions that have haunted us all for decades." "She's not my mother," Sofia snapped, the words exploding from her with volcanic force. "You are not my grandmother. I don't care what some DNA test says. Family isn't about biology. It's about who shows up, who stays, who sacrifices everything to take care of the people they love. And that person," she pointed at Maria with fierce loyalty, "is the only mother I've ever known or ever wanted to know." The declaration should have been heartwarming, a beautiful testament to the bonds they had forged through years of shared struggle and mutual devotion. Instead, it landed like a blow to Maria's already fractured heart, because she could see the fear beneath Sofia's anger, the terror of a young woman whose entire sense of identity was crumbling in real time. Elena sank back into her seat as if Sofia's words had physically wounded her, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Robert's face had gone pale, but his jaw was set with the determination of a man who had spent decades learning to live with disappointment but had never stopped hoping for reconciliation. "Ma'am," Tommy said firmly, addressing Maria while keeping a wary eye on Sofia's agitated state, "I'm going to need to ask your party to keep it down or take this discussion somewhere private. We've got other customers and..." "We're leaving," Sofia announced, grabbing her backpack and slinging it over her shoulder with sharp, angry movements. "Mom, we're leaving right now. You don't have to listen to this. You don't have to put yourself through this torture just because these people have some elaborate story about a missing baby." Maria felt torn between worlds, the familiar pull of her daughter's needs and the inexplicable magnetism of these strangers who seemed to see straight through to parts of her soul she hadn't known existed. The practical part of her mind insisted that Sofia was right, that they should walk away from this impossible situation and return to the known challenges of their ordinary life. But another part of her, a part that had been awakened by Robert's recognition of her scar and Elena's tears over a shared birthmark, whispered that walking away now would be the greatest betrayal of all, not just of these people who had spent decades searching for her, but of herself and the truth that seemed to be clawing its way to the surface despite every rational objection. "I need 48 hours, Maria said, suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension with surprising authority. 48 hours to think, to process, to figure out what this means for all of us. Sofia, I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that whatever the truth turns out to be, it won't change how much I love you or how proud I am of the woman you've become." Sofia's face crumpled as if Maria had struck her, and for a moment she looked exactly like the scared 5-year-old who used to crawl into bed with her parents during thunderstorms. "How can you say it won't change anything? How can you possibly believe that?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread, and Maria realized she had no answer that would satisfy any of them, not Sofia, not these strangers who claimed her as family, not even herself.
The only certainty was that their ordinary Tuesday morning had shattered into fragments that could never be reassembled into their original pattern. Robert reached into his jacket and withdrew a small card, which he placed on the table between them with the reverence of someone handling a sacred relic. This is the address of a private medical facility that handles DNA testing. They're discreet, professional, and fast. If you decide you want answers, they'll be expecting you. Maria stared at the card as if it might bite her, this small piece of paper that represented a doorway between worlds. On one side lay everything she had always believed about herself: Maria Santos, daughter of Antonio and Carmen Delgado, wife to Daniel, mother to Sofia. On the other waited Elena Ashworth, an identity that came with wealth, privilege, and a family that had never stopped searching for her. "I have to go back to work," Maria said finally, her voice mechanical and distant. "Tommy's been more than patient, but I have responsibilities." Elena started to protest, but Robert placed a gentle hand on his wife's arm, silencing her with the practiced communication of a couple who had weathered decades of disappointment together. "Of course," he said simply. "We understand. We'll be staying at the Meridian Hotel downtown if you need to reach us." As they three of them gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Marcus hesitated, pulling out his phone with uncertain movements. Would it be all right if I gave you my number? Not for pressure, just in case you have questions about our family, about what we remember from when you were little." Sofia opened her mouth to object, but Maria found herself nodding before her rational mind could intervene. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I'd like that."
The exchange of numbers felt both momentous and mundane, like any casual interaction between new acquaintances, except for the undercurrent of desperate hope that charged every gesture. When Marcus's phone buzzed with Maria's test message, his smile was so radiant that several nearby diners looked over to see what had caused such obvious joy. After they left, the restaurant seemed strangely empty, despite the continued presence of the lunch crowd. Maria moved through her remaining shifts in a fog, serving familiar customers with automatic efficiency, while her mind churned through possibilities that seemed to grow more surreal with each passing hour. Mrs. Patterson complimented her on her prompt service, unaware that Maria had no memory of refilling her coffee. The Kowalski twins giggled over their chocolate milk, oblivious to the fact that their favorite waitress was experiencing a complete crisis of identity just feet away. Sofia remained at the corner booth, ostensibly studying for her afternoon exam, but actually watching Maria with the intensity of a guardian protecting something precious from imminent theft. Every few minutes, she would glance toward the window, as if expecting the Ashworth family to return and demand immediate custody of the woman they claimed as their own. Around 2 o'clock, when the lunch rush had died down to a manageable hum, Maria finally allowed herself to sit across from her daughter. Sofia's textbook lay forgotten on the table, its pages on pediatric nursing procedures a stark reminder of the future they had all worked so hard to secure. "I need you to understand something," Maria said, reaching across the table to cover Sofia's clenched fist with her own weathered hand. "No matter what we learn from any test, no matter what the truth turns out to be about my past, you are my daughter. You are the best thing I've ever done with my life, and nothing will ever change that." Sofia's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks as she gripped Maria's hand with desperate strength. "But what if they're right? What if you really are their daughter? What if you belong with them instead of with us?" Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The fear in Sofia's voice broke Maria's heart, because she recognized it as her own deepest terror. What if belonging somewhere else meant abandoning the life she had built through 24 years of love, sacrifice, and small daily acts of devotion? What if claiming her true identity meant betraying the only family she had ever consciously chosen? "Listen to me carefully," Maria said, her voice steady despite the chaos raging in her chest. "No matter what I tell you, no matter what the truth turns out to be about my past, I will always be your mother." But even as she spoke the words, she could feel their inadequacy. Because if she really was Elena Ashworth, if she really had been stolen from parents who had spent decades searching for her, then the situation was far more complex than simple declarations of loyalty could address. There would be moral obligations, emotional debts, and practical considerations that couldn't be dismissed with good intentions alone. Sofia seemed to sense the uncertainty beneath Maria's reassurance, and her tears intensified. "I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared that everything is about to change, and I don't know how to handle that. I don't know how to share you with people who have so much more to offer than we do." The admission hung between them like a confession, revealing the insecurity that had always lurked beneath Sofia's fierce protectiveness. Despite her academic success and natural confidence, she was still a young woman who had grown up watching her mother work multiple jobs to keep their family afloat, who had learned to expect disappointment as the natural order of things. "They can't offer you what I can," Maria said firmly. "They can't offer you 24 years of bedtime stories and scraped-knee kisses and homework help and late-night talks about boys and dreams and fears. They can't offer you the knowledge that comes from choosing to love someone every single day, even when it's hard, even when there are easier options available." The words were true, but they were also insufficient. Because the Ashworth family could offer things that Maria's love, however deep, could never provide. Financial security, educational opportunities, social connections that could transform Sofia's future in ways that transcended emotional bonds. Tommy approached their table with careful steps, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of a man who had decided to involve himself in his employee's personal crisis whether she wanted him to or not. "Drink this," he said simply, setting the cups down with deliberate precision. "Both of you. And then tell me what's really going on here, because I've been watching you two for 6 years, and I've never seen either of you look this terrified."
The coffee was perfect, exactly the way Maria preferred it, with just enough cream to soften the edge and a hint of cinnamon that Tommy added because he knew it reminded her of her childhood. Or what she had thought was her childhood. Now even that small comfort felt tainted with uncertainty. "Those people," Sofia began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with how to explain something that defied rational explanation. "They think Mom is their daughter who was kidnapped as a baby 24 years ago." Tommy's weathered face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, concern, and finally a kind of grim acceptance that spoke to his years of experience with life's capacity for unexpected cruelty. "And you think they might be right?" Maria touched the scar above her eyebrow unconsciously, her fingers tracing the familiar ridge of tissue that had suddenly become evidence in a case she never knew existed. "I don't know what to think. There are similarities, things that are hard to explain as coincidence." "Such as?" The question forced Maria to articulate observations that she had been trying to keep buried beneath denial and rational objections. "The man, Robert, he recognized this scar immediately. He knew exactly where it would be and what it looked like. And there's a birthmark on my hand that matches one his missing daughter had. And Sofia," she looked at her daughter with new eyes, seeing features that suddenly seemed to echo the aristocratic bone structure of Elena Ashworth. "Sofia looks like them. Now that I know to look for it, the resemblance is unmistakable." Tommy absorbed this information with the calm deliberation of someone who had learned to process life's surprises without losing his equilibrium. "What are you going to do?" The simple question contained multitudes. What was she going to do about the DNA test? What was she going to do if it confirmed her worst fears and deepest hopes? What was she going to do about Daniel, who depended on routine and familiar faces for his continued recovery?
What was she going to do about Sofia, who was clearly terrified of losing the only mother she had ever known to people who could offer her so much more? "I'm going to take the test," Maria said, the words emerging with surprising clarity and conviction. "I'm going to find out the truth, whatever it is, and then I'm going to figure out how to live with it." Sofia made a sound that might have been a sob or a protest, but she didn't argue. Perhaps she too had reached the conclusion that uncertainty was a poison that would slowly destroy them all if allowed to fester. Perhaps she understood that the only way forward was through the fire of truth, regardless of how badly it might burn. "And if the test confirms what they believe?" Tommy asked gently. Maria met his eyes steadily, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Then I'm going to figure out how to be Alana Ashworth without stopping being Maria Santos. I'm going to figure out how to honor the family that lost me without abandoning the family I chose to build. And I'm going to trust that love is strong enough to survive the truth." The words sounded braver than she felt, but speaking them out loud seemed to give them weight and substance. Around them, Romano's continued its peaceful afternoon rhythm, unaware that one of its most reliable employees was contemplating a transformation that would challenge everything she had believed about the nature of identity, loyalty, and love. The 48 hours that followed passed like a fever dream, each moment stretching and contracting in ways that defied the normal flow of time. Maria had submitted to the DNA test at the discreet medical facility Robert had recommended, a sterile environment of white walls and professional efficiency, where her identity was reduced to a simple cheek swab and a series of forms filled out in duplicate. The technician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, had treated the procedure with the same casual competence she might have shown for any routine medical test, unaware that the small plastic tube she labeled and sealed contained the potential to shatter and rebuild an entire family's understanding of themselves. Sofia had insisted on accompanying her, sitting rigid in the waiting area while Maria provided her sample. The girl's face had been pale but determined, her jaw set with the stubborn courage that had carried her through her father's accident and their family's financial struggles. She held Maria's hand during the brief procedure, her grip tight enough to leave marks, as if she could anchor her mother to their shared reality through sheer physical connection. The drive home had been silent, except for the soft hum of their aging Honda's engine and the occasional sniffle from Sofia, who was fighting tears with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else in her life. Maria wanted to offer comfort, but what words could possibly address the magnitude of what they were facing? How do you reassure someone that everything will be okay when you have no idea what okay even means anymore? Daniel had been waiting for them in their small apartment, sitting in his favorite chair by the window, with the afternoon light casting shadows across his still handsome face. 3 years post-accident, he was functioning about 70% of his pre-injury capacity, enough to live independently with minimal supervision, but not enough to return to his former job as a construction foreman or to fully comprehend the complex emotional dynamics that were currently tearing their family apart.
"How was lunch?" he asked, with the gentle confusion that had become his default expression for situations he couldn't quite grasp. "Sofia said you were meeting some new people at the restaurant." Maria and Sofia exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years of protecting Daniel from stresses that might impede his recovery. They had become experts at presenting him with simplified versions of complicated truths, editing their lives to fit within the boundaries of what his healing brain could safely process. "Just some customers who wanted to chat," Maria said carefully, settling onto the couch beside his chair. "Nothing important." But Daniel's damaged brain sometimes compensated for lost analytical capacity with heightened emotional intuition, and he was studying Maria's face with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You look different," he said slowly. "Worried about something big." The observation hit too close to the truth for comfort. Maria had always prided herself on her ability to maintain composure under pressure, but the events of the morning had left her feeling exposed and transparent, as if her internal turmoil was written across her features in letters too large to hide. Sleep proved elusive, and Maria spent most of the night staring at the ceiling while Daniel snored softly beside her.
She thought about Antonio and Carmen Delgado, the people who had raised her with what she had always interpreted as genuine love and devotion. If the DNA test confirmed Robert's claims, then everything she remembered about her childhood would need to be recontextualized. Were Carmen's nervous glances toward authority figures the normal anxiety of an immigrant woman navigating an unfamiliar system, or the paranoid behavior of someone living with the constant fear of discovery? Were Antonio's stories about their small extended family the truth, or elaborate fabrications designed to explain away the absence of relatives who might ask uncomfortable questions? Thursday morning dawned gray and drizzling, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seemed designed to match Maria's internal state of anxious uncertainty. She had called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, claiming a stomach bug that was actually the churning anxiety of someone waiting for news that would either vindicate or destroy her sense of self. The call was scheduled to come at 10 o'clock. Robert had arranged for the results to be delivered simultaneously to both families, ensuring that no one would have an advantage of advanced knowledge that might be used to manipulate the situation. It was a considerate gesture from a man who was clearly accustomed to managing complex negotiations and delicate interpersonal dynamics. Sofia had skipped her morning classes, despite Maria's protests that her education was too important to sacrifice for what might turn out to be a false alarm. The girls sat at their small kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and staring at her phone as if she could will it to ring with news that would restore their ordinary life. Daniel sensed the tension without understanding its source, and he hovered nearby with the anxious energy of someone who knows something important is happening but lacks the cognitive capacity to fully grasp what it might be. He kept offering to make breakfast, to run errands, to help in any way he could, his damaged brain's way of expressing love through the only means still readily available to him. At 9:58, Maria's phone rang. The sound cut through the apartment's tense silence like a gunshot, making all 3 of them jump. Sofia's cup rattled against its saucer, and Daniel's hands began the nervous fidgeting that indicated his stress levels were rising beyond his ability to self-regulate. Maria stared at the phone for several rings before Sofia reached across the table and grabbed her wrist. "Mom, you have to answer it." With trembling fingers, Maria accepted the call. Robert's voice came through the speaker, professional, but strained with emotions he was clearly fighting to control. "Maria, are you there?" "I'm here," she managed, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "The results came back. I'm going to put you on speaker so Elena and Marcus can hear as well. Dr. Patterson from the lab is here with us to explain the findings."
There was a moment of shuffling as the call was transferred, and then a new voice came on the line. Crisp, professional, clinical in the way that medical professionals learn to be when delivering news that will change lives forever. "Miss Santos, this is Dr. Patricia Patterson from Genomic Solutions Laboratory. I have the results of the DNA comparison test you requested." Sofia's grip on Maria's wrist tightened until it was almost painful, her knuckles white with the force of her desperation. Daniel moved closer, his confused but caring presence an anchor of familiarity in the storm that was about to break over their lives. "The samples provided show a 99.97% probability of biological relationship," Dr. Patterson continued, with the same clinical neutrality she might have used to discuss blood pressure readings. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth, Maria Santos is your biological daughter. Miss Santos, these are your biological parents." The words hit the apartment like a physical force, sucking all the oxygen out of the air and leaving the 3 occupants gasping in the aftermath. Sofia made a sound that was part sob, part scream, her worst fears confirmed by the cold precision of scientific analysis. Daniel stepped backwards, as if he had been pushed,
his face cycling through confusion, concern, and a growing alarm that indicated his fragile emotional equilibrium was being threatened by circumstances beyond his comprehension. Maria felt the room spinning around her, reality reorganizing itself into patterns that made no rational sense. She was Elena Ashworth. The life she had lived, the identity she had claimed, the family she had built, all of it had been constructed on a foundation of lies and theft and desperate love from people who had taken what didn't belong to them. "Elena?" Robert's voice came through the phone, thick with 24 years of accumulated grief and hope. "Elena, are you there? Are you okay?" The name felt strange in her ears, like a word from a foreign language that she almost but not quite understood. She was Elena. She had always been Elena. But she was also Maria, wife to Daniel and mother to Sofia, and employee of Romano's Italian Bistro. The two identities existed simultaneously in her consciousness, neither one fully able to eclipse the other. "I don't know how to be Elena," she whispered, the confession torn from somewhere deep in her chest. "I don't know how to stop being Maria." Elena Ashworth, her biological mother, was crying openly on the other end of the line, her sobs carrying across the miles between them with the force of accumulated maternal love that had been denied expression for over 20 years. "You don't have to stop being anything," she managed through her tears. "You just have to let us love you. Let us be part of your life. Let us know our granddaughter." Sofia stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward as she backed away from the table as if the phone itself were toxic. "No," she said, her voice rising to a near shout. "No, this doesn't change anything. DNA doesn't make a family. Love makes a family. Choice makes a family. These people are strangers, no matter what some test says." Marcus's voice came through the speaker, gentle but persistent. "Sofia, I know this is overwhelming. I know it's scary, but we're not trying to take your mother away from you. We're trying to expand your family, not replace it." "With what?" Sofia demanded, her face flushed with anger and fear. "With money, with a fancy name and a big house and opportunities I could never give her? Is that supposed to make up for 24 years of not being there when she needed you?" The accusation hit its target with devastating accuracy. Robert's voice, when he finally spoke, was heavy with the guilt that had clearly haunted him for over 22 years. "You're right," he said simply. "We weren't there. We failed to protect her when she was just a baby, and we failed to find her when she needed us. Nothing can make up for that. But maybe we can be there for her now, and for you, if you'll let us." Daniel, who had been growing increasingly agitated as the conversation continued, suddenly stepped forward and took the phone from Maria's nerveless fingers. His voice, when he spoke, carried the simple clarity that sometimes emerged from his damaged brain like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Who are you people? Why are you making my wife cry? Why are you upsetting my daughter?" The question silenced everyone on both ends of the line. In Daniel's simplified worldview, the situation was clear and straightforward. Strangers were causing pain to the people he loved, and that was unacceptable, regardless of DNA tests or biological relationships or complicated histories of loss and recovery. Elena's voice, when she replied, was gentle and respectful in a way that suggested she understood the importance of Daniel's role in Maria's life. "We're people who love Maria very much. We lost her a long time ago, and we've been looking for her ever since. We don't want to hurt anyone or take anyone away. We just want to be part of her life." "She has a life," Daniel said firmly. His cognitive limitations actually provided clarity that the other's more complex reasoning had obscured. "She has us. We love her. We take care of each other. Why isn't that enough?"
The simple question contained multitudes, challenging assumptions about blood relations and biological bonds that the others had been taking for granted. Why wasn't the family that Maria had chosen and built and nurtured for decades enough? Why did the accident of her birth and the crime of her kidnapping create obligations that transcended the love she had freely given and received? Maria gently took the phone back from Daniel, her hands steady despite the emotional earthquake that was reshaping her internal landscape. Robert, Elena, Marcus, I need time to process this. I need time to figure out what it means and how we move forward. Can you give me that? Of course, Robert replied immediately. Take all of the time you need. We've waited 24 years. We can wait a little longer. But, Elena, I hope you'll let us see you. I hope you'll give us a chance to know the woman our little girl became. The phrase, our little girl, made Maria's chest tighten with competing emotions. She was simultaneously touched by the enduring parental love it represented and resentful of the claim it implied on a life she had built independently of their influence or assistance. After the call ended, the apartment fell into a silence so complete that the ambient sounds of their neighborhood, traffic on the street below, children playing in the courtyard, the distant hum of the city, seemed unnaturally loud. Sofia had retreated to the far corner of the living room, where she stood with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were physically holding her world together by force of will. Robert moved between them with the confused anxiety of someone who sensed that his carefully structured routine was being threatened, but lacked the cognitive tools to understand how or why. "Are we moving?" he asked suddenly, the question emerging from some deep association his brain had made between emotional upheaval and physical displacement. "Are we leaving our home?" The question broke Maria's heart because it revealed Daniel's most fundamental fear, that the stability they had worked so hard to rebuild after his accident would once again be swept away by forces beyond their control. He had lost so much already: his career, his cognitive abilities, his sense of himself as the protector and provider. The possibility of losing their home, their routine, their shared life might be more than his healing brain could bear. "We're not going anywhere," Maria said firmly, moving to take his hands in hers. "This is our home. This is our family. Nothing is going to change that." But even as she spoke the words, Maria knew they might not be entirely true. Because how do you maintain an ordinary life when you've discovered that your entire identity is built on a foundation of lies? How do you continue being Maria Santos when you know you're actually Elena Ashworth? And how do you honor the claims of biological family without betraying the family you've chosen to build and protect? Sofia approached slowly, her face streaked with tears, but her jaw set with determination. "Mom, what are you going to do?" Maria looked between her daughter and her husband, these two people who had defined her understanding of love and responsibility for so many years. Then she thought of the three strangers who had wept with joy at discovering her identity, who had spent decades never giving up hope of finding their missing family member. "I'm going to try to figure out how to be both. I'm going to try to figure out how to be Elena Ashworth without stopping being Maria Santos. And I'm going to need your help to do it." The next 3 weeks unfolded like a delicate dance between worlds, each step carefully choreographed to avoid the emotional landmines that lay scattered across the landscape of their newly complicated lives. Maria, who was slowly learning to think of herself as Elena, though the name still felt like an ill-fitting garment, had arranged to meet with her biological family in neutral locations, carefully structured encounters that allowed for gradual relationship building without threatening the stability of her chosen family. The first meeting took place at Riverside Park, where Maria often brought Sofia for picnics when she was little. The setting felt appropriate, public enough to provide escape routes if emotions became overwhelming, familiar enough to ground Maria in her established identity, and beautiful enough to suggest the possibility of joy emerging from confusion and pain. Robert, Elena, and Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying themselves with the careful restraint of people who understood they were walking on sacred ground. Elena wore a simple blue dress that complemented her silver hair, and Maria noticed with a start that the color brought out flecks of gold in her eyes that Sofia had inherited, along with the elegant line of her jaw and the graceful way she moved her hands when she spoke. They had brought photographs, decades worth of family memories that documented the life Elena might have lived if she had never been taken. Baby pictures of Marcus, who had grown up as an only child, but with an ever-present awareness of the sister he had never known. Holiday gatherings where an empty chair spoke louder than the filled ones. Birthday parties where Elena's absence was acknowledged with a single cupcake, lit and wished upon before being carefully wrapped and saved until it grew stale. "We never stopped celebrating your birthday," Elena explained, her voice soft with the weight of accumulated longing. "Every year we would have a little ceremony, nothing elaborate, just the three of us, and a cake and wishes for your safety and happiness wherever you were." The revelation made Maria's chest tight with competing emotions. The devotion it represented was beautiful and heartbreaking, but it also felt like a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. How do you live up to 24 years of idealized memory? How do you become the person your family imagined you would be when you've already become someone entirely different? Sofia had reluctantly agreed to attend the meeting, though she maintained careful physical distance from the Ashworth family and spoke only when directly addressed. Her protective instincts remained on high alert, and Maria could see her daughter cataloging every gesture, every word, every sign that these wealthy strangers might try to claim more of Maria's life than they had already taken. But even Sofia couldn't remain entirely immune to Marcus's gentle humor or Elena's obvious maternal warmth. When Marcus shared stories about his work as a pediatric physical therapist, a career choice he claimed was influenced by his lifelong hope that helping other children might somehow balance the cosmic scales and bring his sister home, Sofia's expression softened slightly. When Elena spoke with tears in her eyes about watching Maria serve other customers at Romano's with such natural kindness and grace, Sofia's grip on Maria's hand loosened fractionally. Robert proved to be the most challenging family member for Maria to connect with, not because he was unkind or demanding, but because his love was wrapped in layers of guilt and regret that made every interaction feel weighted with unspoken apologies. He was a man who had built a business empire, but considered himself a failure as a father, who had spent millions on private investigators, but couldn't forgive himself for the moment of inattention that had allowed his daughter to be stolen. "I should have been watching more carefully," he said during their third meeting, this time at a quiet coffee shop downtown. "I should have held on to the stroller. I should have never let you out of my sight, not even for a second." The raw pain in his voice made Maria want to comfort him, but she also felt a flicker of resentment at being made responsible for his emotional healing. She had spent 48 years building her own life, making her own choices, surviving her own struggles. The burden of absolving him for his perceived failures felt unfair, even as she recognized the genuine love that motivated his need for forgiveness. Sofia, who had been listening to this exchange with growing irritation, finally spoke up. "She doesn't owe you forgiveness for something that happened when she was a baby," she said bluntly, her protective instincts overriding her usual politeness. "And she doesn't owe you 24 years of missing her. She owes you exactly what she chooses to give you, and nothing more." The observation hung in the air like a challenge, forcing everyone at the table to confront the complex dynamics of obligation, choice, and love that defined their unprecedented situation. Robert's face went through a series of expressions before settling on something that looked like relief mixed with respect. "You're absolutely right," he said to Sofia, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Elena doesn't owe us anything. She's already given us more than we had any right to hope for just by agreeing to meet with us. The fact that she's willing to let us know her at all is a gift." The acknowledgement seemed to unlock something in Sofia's defensive posture, and for the first time since the DNA results had been confirmed, she looked at Robert with something approaching warmth. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "I needed to hear it." The breakthrough led to more natural conversations, and Maria found herself sharing stories about Sofia's childhood, about Daniel's accident and recovery, about the small dreams and daily struggles that had defined their family life. The Ashworth family listened with the hungry attention of people who had been starved for exactly these kinds of mundane, precious details. In return, they shared their own stories. Elena's work with children's charities, which had begun as a way to channel her grief into something constructive. Robert's business success, which had provided the resources to maintain an extensive search, but had never filled the emptiness left by his missing daughter. Marcus's decision to dedicate his life to helping other families heal from trauma, which had been shaped by watching his parents struggle with their loss. Slowly, carefully, they began to build bridges between their separate worlds. Daniel's integration into this expanded family constellation proved surprisingly smooth, perhaps because his cognitive limitations stripped away the complex emotional defenses that made the situation difficult for everyone. To Daniel, the situation was simple. Maria had found some relatives she hadn't known she had, and relatives were generally a good thing as long as they were kind to the people he loved. Elena's gentle manner and genuine interest in his recovery story won him over completely. She listened
with patient attention while he explained his physical therapy routines and his strategies for managing his memory problems, never showing the polite impatience that many people displayed when talking with brain injury survivors. When she offered to arrange for him to see specialists who might help improve his cognitive function, not trying to fix him, just offering resources that might make his daily life easier, Daniel accepted with the simple grace of someone who had learned not to let pride interfere with practical help. Marcus connected with Daniel over their shared interest in working with their hands, Marcus through his physical therapy practice, Daniel through the woodworking hobby he had developed as part of his rehabilitation. They spent hours in the apartment's small workshop area, Marcus asking careful questions about Daniel's techniques, while Daniel patiently demonstrated the adaptations he had developed to work around his cognitive limitations. The genuine respect and friendship that developed between them felt like a gift to Maria, proof that her chosen family and biological family could coexist without competing for loyalty or love. 6 months after that first shocking encounter at Romano's, the two families had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable, if not always comfortable. Sunday dinners alternated between the Santos apartment and the Ashworth family home, a sprawling estate in the hills overlooking the city. Sofia had initially been overwhelmed by the wealth on display, the original artwork, the marble countertops, the wine cellar that probably cost more than their annual rent. But Elena's warm hospitality and obvious delight in having a granddaughter to spoil had gradually won her over. The financial support that the Ashworth family offered was handled with delicate care, structured as gifts rather than charity, and always presented as investments in shared family goals rather than attempts to solve problems with money. Sofia's remaining college tuition was quietly handled, presented as a grandfather's joy in supporting her granddaughter's education. Daniel's medical expenses disappeared into premium insurance coverage that Robert arranged through his business connections. Maria found herself with a car that actually started reliably and a wardrobe that didn't require careful budgeting to maintain. But the most profound changes were emotional rather than financial. Maria discovered that she had inherited Elena's ear for music and Robert's head for numbers, traits that had never fully emerged in her working-class environment, but bloomed with encouragement and opportunity. She began taking piano lessons, something she had dreamed of as a child but never thought possible, and found that her fingers seemed to remember melodies she had never consciously learned.
Sofia, meanwhile, discovered that her passion for helping others extended beyond nursing into broader healthcare advocacy, a realization that came through long conversations with Marcus about the intersection of physical healing and social justice. She changed her major to public health with a specialization in trauma-informed care, a decision that felt like a natural evolution rather than a radical departure from her original plans. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the differences in background and expectations created friction, when Elena's suggestions for Sofia's future sounded like attempts to control rather than support, when Robert's business contacts and networking opportunities felt like pressure to abandon the working-class identity that Maria had always worn with pride. The most difficult conversation came 8 months after the DNA revelation, when Elena tentatively suggested that Maria might want to consider changing her name legally to Elena Ashworth Santos, a hyphenated identity that would honor both her biological heritage and her chosen family. "I understand that Maria Santos is who you've been for most of your life," Elena said carefully, her words chosen with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation for weeks. "But Elena was who you were born to be. I just thought perhaps it might feel healing to claim that part of yourself as well." The suggestion hit Maria like a physical blow, not because it was cruel or demanding, but because it forced her to confront questions about identity that she had been avoiding. Was Maria Santos simply a fictional character she had been playing for 2 decades? Was Elena Ashworth her real self, waiting to be reclaimed and celebrated? Or was the truth something more complex, that identity was fluid, chosen, constructed from daily actions and relationships rather than determined by biology or birth certificates? "I can't," Maria said quietly, her hand moving instinctively to touch the locket at her throat that still contained Sofia's baby picture. "I can't become someone else, even if that someone is who I was supposed to be originally. Maria Santos is who I chose to become. She's who Daniel fell in love with, who raised Sofia, who built a life from nothing but determination and love. I won't dishonor her by pretending she was never real." Elena's face crumpled slightly, but she nodded with the grace of someone who had learned to accept disappointment with dignity. "Of course," she said softly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have suggested it. I miss Elena so much sometimes. I've missed her for so long that I sometimes forget that you're not her. Not exactly. You're something new, something that neither Elena nor Maria could have been alone." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship, a moment when Elena stopped trying to reclaim the daughter she had lost and began appreciating the woman that daughter had become. It was also when Maria stopped feeling guilty for not being the Elena that her biological family had imagined all these years.
A year after the revelation, Romano's Italian Bistro hosted an unusual celebration. Tommy had insisted on throwing a party to commemorate what he called the most interesting Tuesday in restaurant history, and both the Santos and Ashworth families had gathered in the familiar warmth of the place where their worlds had first collided. The corner booth where everything had begun was decorated with flowers from Elena's garden and photographs from both families, images that told the story of parallel lives that had finally converged. Sofia had created a photo timeline that showed her mother's 2 identities side by side: Maria Santos working at the restaurant, caring for Daniel, helping with homework, and Elena Ashworth at family gatherings, graduation ceremonies, quiet moments of connection with her newfound relatives. "It's like you were always both people," Sofia observed, studying the display with the analytical eye she had developed through her public health studies. Like Maria Santos was just Elena Ashworth living in a different world, but still being fundamentally the same person.
someone who takes care of others, who finds strength in small kindnesses, who builds family wherever she goes. The observation felt profound and true in a way that formal definitions of identity had never managed. Maria looked around the restaurant that had become the center of her extended family constellation. Daniel and Marcus discussing a new woodworking project. Elena and Sofia planning a volunteer initiative at the Children's Hospital. Robert and Tommy engaging in what appeared to be a heated but friendly debate about baseball statistics. This was what family looked like, she realized. Not the perfect harmony of shared DNA or common backgrounds, but the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of people choosing to love each other across differences and difficulties. It was Elena learning to make Daniel's favorite breakfast, and Maria learning to play the piano pieces that reminded Elena of her own childhood. It was Sofia teaching Robert to text message properly, and Marcus showing Daniel adaptive techniques for his woodworking tools. It was 1,000 small kindnesses and accommodations that transformed strangers into relatives, and relatives into something deeper, a chosen constellation of people committed to each other's happiness and growth. 2 years after that first shocking Tuesday morning, Maria stood in the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital, holding her newborn grandson while Sofia slept in the bed beside her. The baby, David Daniel Santos, named for both grandfathers he would know and love, had arrived 3 weeks early but perfectly healthy. His tiny fingers wrapped around Maria's thumb with the same determined grip she remembered from Sofia's birth. Elena sat in the chair beside the bed, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter, for she had finally learned to think of Maria as her daughter rather than the lost Elena, cradled the next generation of their complex family. "He has your hands," she whispered wonderfully. "The same long fingers. The same graceful way of moving them." Marcus stood by the window, his own eyes suspiciously bright, as he absorbed the reality that he was now an uncle to a baby who would grow up knowing all his relatives from the very beginning. No mysteries, no missing pieces, no years of searching and wondering. Just the solid foundation of a family that had learned to be both strong and flexible, rooted in love rather than limited by convention. Robert had stayed home with Daniel, who found hospitals overwhelming, but had insisted that someone needed to start building the promised cradle for his grandson. The image of the two grandfathers working together in Daniel's workshop, one a billionaire businessman, the other a brain injury survivor, both united in their determination to create something beautiful for the child they already adored, had become a symbol of how their family had learned to transcend differences through shared purpose. Sofia stirred in her bed, reaching instinctively for her son. Maria placed the baby in her mother's arms with the practiced competence of someone who had learned that love multiplies rather than divides, that expanding a family doesn't diminish existing bonds, but creates new possibilities for connection and joy. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion and wonder. "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about choosing sides or loyalty tests. Thank you for showing me that love is big enough to include everyone." The gratitude in her daughter's voice made Maria's chest tight with emotions she couldn't fully name. Looking around the hospital room at her biological mother, her brother, her daughter, her grandson, all of them connected through her, but also connected to each other in ways that transcended her central role, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had managed to hold on to everything precious while making room for new treasures. "I love you all," she said simply, the words encompassing not just the people in the room, but Daniel at home, Tommy at the restaurant, the customers who had become friends, the vast network of chosen family that made life rich and meaningful.
all of you, exactly as you are, exactly as we are together. As the late afternoon light slanted through the hospital window, illuminating 4 generations of a family that defied easy categorization, Maria understood that this was what healing looked like. Not the erasure of past pain or the resolution of all complications, but the ability to hold joy and sorrow simultaneously, to honor loss while celebrating discovery, to be both Maria Santos and Elena Ashworth without contradiction or apology.
The baby sleeping peacefully in Sofia's arms would grow up with the security of knowing exactly where he belonged, everywhere, and with everyone who chose to love him. He would learn from his great-grandmother Elena's elegance and his grandfather Daniel's resilience, from his uncle Marcus's compassion and his grandfather Robert's determination, from his grandmother Maria's strength and his mother Sofia's fierce loyalty. He would understand from his first breath that family was not a limitation but a liberation, not a narrow definition but an expanding circle of people committed to each other's well-being and happiness. And maybe, Maria thought as she watched her family settle into the comfortable rhythm of loving each other, that was the most valuable inheritance of all, the knowledge that home was not a place you were born into, but a sanctuary you created through daily acts of courage, kindness, and choice. 3 years later, Maria stood behind the counter at Romano's, not as a waitress, but as the new co-owner alongside Tommy, thanks to an investment from the Ashworth Family Foundation. The restaurant had expanded, adding a second dining room and a small stage where local musicians performed on weekends. Sofia, now graduated and working as a trauma counselor at the Children's Hospital, stopped by every Tuesday for lunch with baby David, who had become the unofficial mascot of Romano's. Elena volunteered at the hospital's Family Resource Center, her experience helping other families navigate crisis and reunion. Marcus had opened a rehabilitation clinic that specialized in helping families heal together, while Robert had stepped back from his business empire to spend more time with his grandson and the son-in-law who had taught him that strength came in many forms. Daniel still lived in their same apartment, but now his workshop produced handcrafted toys for the Children's Hospital, each piece a small masterpiece of patience and love. He had never fully understood the complexity of Maria's biological identity revelation, but he grasped the essential truth: their family had grown larger and more loving. As Maria prepared the corner booth for the weekly family dinner, now a tradition that brought together 8 people who might never have met in any other circumstance, she reflected on the strange mathematics of love. She had feared that discovering her biological family would require her to choose, to divide her heart and loyalty into smaller portions. Instead, she had learned that love multiplied, that Maria Santos and Elena Ashworth could coexist in the same body, that chosen family and biological family could strengthen rather than compete with each other, that home was not a place you found, but a feeling you created through daily acts of courage and grace. The scar above her eyebrow caught the afternoon light, no longer a mark of mysterious origin, but a symbol of resilience, of a life lived fully in spite of its unconventional beginning.